My name is Dolores, and at 68 years old, I never thought my own son would tell me to be grateful for living in the guest house of the property I worked my entire life to buy. After my husband Frank passed, I let Jack and his wife Amanda move into our main house temporarily. 5 years later, they acted like they owned the place. When Jack publicly told me to be grateful for the guest house, I made a decision that shocked everyone. If you enjoy stories about standing up for yourself, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, as I tell you how I quietly sold my house right from under my ungrateful son. Frank and I were never wealthy people. We both came from humble beginnings in a small town outside of Pittsburgh. Frank worked at the steel mill while I put myself through nursing school. We married young, had Jack, when I was just 26, and spent the next 15 years living in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment that always smelled like the Chinese restaurant below. But we had big dreams. Every night after tucking Jack and Frank and I would sit at our wobbly kitchen table and put money into our house fund jar. The mill shut down when Jack was 12, and Frank took on 2 jobs as a security guard and weekend handyman. I picked up extra nursing shifts, often working 16 hours straight. We missed birthdays, anniversaries, and school events. Jack resented us sometimes for being absent, but we were building a future. We explained that to him repeatedly, but teenagers rarely understand sacrifice. By the time Jack graduated high school, we had saved nearly $80,000. Not quite enough for our dream home, but Jack was headed to college on a partial scholarship, and we would have a few more years to save. We continued our frugal lifestyle, driving the same car for 15 years, skipping vacations and eating home-cooked meals. When Jack graduated college and got his first marketing job, we were so proud. He moved to Chicago, and we only saw him on major holidays. Frank and I focused entirely on our dream. 20 years ago, when I turned 48 and Frank was 52, we finally found it. A beautiful 2-story colonial on a half-acre lot just outside the city. It had a gorgeous main house with 4 bedrooms and a charming guest house that Frank immediately claimed as his workshop. I still remember the day we got the keys. I cried as Frank carried me across the threshold like a new bride. We had worked so hard for so long. This house represented every sacrifice, every missed opportunity, every extra shift, every penny pinched. It was our reward for decades of hard work. We spent the next 15 years filling that house with love and memories. We hosted Christmas dinners in our spacious dining room. We planted a garden that Frank tended with meticulous care. We finally took those vacations we had postponed, but always rushed back home because we missed our sanctuary. Jack visited occasionally and eventually introduced us to Amanda. They married in our backyard under the oak tree Frank and I had planted when we first moved in. I thought my heart would burst with joy watching my son start his own family on the property we had worked so hard to provide. Then 5 years ago, Frank complained of chest pains while working in the garden. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Just like that, my soulmate of 42 years vanished from my life. The house that had once felt so full of happiness suddenly echoed with emptiness. I rattled around alone in those 4 bedrooms for months. Everything reminded me of Frank. His coffee mug in the cabinet, his chair at the dining table, his slippers by the bed. I fell into a depression that concerned my friends and coworkers. I had retired from nursing by then, so I had few distractions from my grief. Jack and Amanda would call occasionally from Chicago, but they were busy with their careers. When Jack mentioned they were thinking of moving back to be closer to me, I felt a spark of hope for the first time since Frank died. 3 months later, Jack called with news. He had accepted a job offer locally, but housing prices had skyrocketed, and they were struggling to find something in their price range. Almost without thinking, I offered a solution. "My house is too big for just me," I told him. "Why not move into the main house while you save for your own place? I could take the guest house." Frank had converted it into a comfortable one-bedroom space with a small kitchen and living area. It would be plenty for just me. Jack seemed hesitant, but Amanda immediately loved the idea. I clarified that this would be temporary, maybe a year or two, while they saved for a down payment. They both agreed enthusiastically. I was thrilled at the prospect of having my son close again, and perhaps grandchildren in the future. The week they moved in, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I carefully moved my essential belongings to the guest house, leaving most of the furniture and family heirlooms in the main house for them to use. The guest house felt cozy, and I enjoyed hearing life in the main house again. Jack and Amanda invited me for dinner that first night, and we toasted to our new arrangement. I went to bed feeling that Frank would have approved of this plan. I had no idea how quickly things would change. The first few months with Jack and Amanda went smoothly enough. They were settling in. I was adjusting to the guest house, and we shared occasional meals together. Jack seemed happy to be back in his childhood hometown, and Amanda was friendly if a bit reserved. I gave them space, understanding that newlyweds need their privacy. Around month 4, I noticed the first changes. I came home from my weekly bridge game to find that Amanda had painted the living room a sleek gray, replacing the warm yellow Frank and I had chosen years ago. She looked nervous when I walked in quickly, explaining that she thought a more modern color would brighten the space. I swallowed my initial reaction. It was just paint, after all. I smiled and told her it looked lovely, though my heart ached, seeing another piece of Frank disappear. The next week, Jack mentioned they were thinking of replacing some of the kitchen appliances. The refrigerator was outdated, he said, and they wanted something with a water dispenser and ice maker. I reminded him gently that this was a temporary arrangement, and asked if such investments made sense. That was the first time I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Annoyance, defensiveness. Whatever it was, it vanished quickly, as he assured me they would take the appliances when they moved out. I nodded and dropped the subject, ignoring the unease settling in my stomach. As spring arrived, I went to plant my usual vegetable garden in the backyard. To my surprise, Amanda had already redesigned the entire garden space, removing Frank's carefully planned beds and installing raised planters in different locations. When I asked about it, she cheerfully explained that she had been reading about modern gardening techniques and wanted to try them. Again, I said nothing. They were making a home, I told myself. That was natural. By the 6-month mark, I realized Jack and Amanda had stopped mentioning house hunting entirely. When I casually brought up a nice property for sale in the neighborhood, Jack quickly changed the subject. When I more directly asked about their timeline for finding their own place, Amanda looked at Jack with a strange expression before he answered. "We are still settling in, Mom," he said. "The market is crazy right now. Better to wait a bit longer." I nodded and let it go. But a seed of worry had been planted. As their first year in my house approached, more concerning patterns emerged. The driveway, once shared equally, now regularly, had my car relegated to the street when their friends visited. The patio furniture I had chosen with Frank was replaced without discussion. Family photos were removed from walls to make room for their modern art prints. Most troubling was the gradual change in how Jack spoke to me. His tone became increasingly condescending, as if I were a tenant rather than the homeowner. He would make comments about how I kept the guest house, suggesting improvements as though it were his property to critique. My older brother Marcus visited for a weekend and immediately noticed the dynamic. After dinner with Jack and Amanda, where Jack had referred to my dining room as our dining room, Marcus confronted me in the guest house. "Dolores, what is going on here?" he asked bluntly. "That boy is acting like he owns the place." I defended Jack, weakly explaining our arrangement, but even as I spoke, I recognized the truth in my brother's observation. "That was never meant to be permanent," Marcus said. "You need to have a serious talk with him." I promised I would, but fear held me back. Jack was my only child, my connection to Frank, my family. What if setting boundaries pushed him away? Instead, I tried gentle conversations. I mentioned missing certain aspects of the main house. I reminisced about plans Frank and I had made for renovations. I hinted that the guest house, while lovely, was not where I had envisioned spending my retirement years. Jack either missed or ignored these hints. Amanda became increasingly territorial, referring to the main house exclusively as our house when speaking to friends on the phone. I overheard her giving her parents a tour describing how they had updated the old-fashioned house to suit their taste. One evening, looking for a photo album I had left in the main house, I discovered boxes of my belongings had been moved to the garage. Items Frank and I had collected over decades were stacked carelessly among dusty holiday decorations. My grandmother's china, our wedding album, the handcrafted bookshelf Frank had made for our anniversary, all relegated to storage without my knowledge or consent. I stood in that garage for nearly an hour, touching these pieces of my life, these physical connections to Frank, now deemed unworthy of display. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into the house and demand explanations. Instead, I quietly took the photo album and returned to the guest house, a deeper hurt taking root. That night, I called my friend Judith, a retired attorney who had lost her husband around the same time I lost Frank. "I think I made a mistake," I confessed, then poured out the whole story. Judith listened patiently, then asked the question I had been avoiding. "Do you still have the deed to the house in your name?" I realized I did. Frank and I had never changed it after his death. The property was solely in my name. "Then you have options," she said simply. But even knowing this, I hesitated. These were not strangers taking advantage of me. This was my son. How had we reached this point? When had his sense of entitlement grown so large? When had my desire to be close to my only child blinded me to what was happening? As we approached the 2-year mark of our temporary arrangement, I finally gathered my courage and invited Jack to lunch, just the two of us. At a quiet diner away from the house, I broached the subject directly. "I think it might be time to discuss your plans for finding your own place," I said carefully. "We agreed this would be temporary, and it has been almost 2 years." Jack looked genuinely surprised, as if the thought had never occurred to him. "But everything is working out so well," he said. "Amanda loves the house we have, fixed it up, and you seem comfortable in the guest house." I reminded him that the guest house was never meant to be my permanent home, that I missed my house, the one Frank and I had worked so hard to buy. His expression changed then, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, as if explaining something to a child, "Amanda and I have put thousands of dollars into updating that house. We have made it our home. It would be impractical to move now." I felt like he had slapped me. Updating that house, our home, as if my decades of sacrifice counted for nothing, as if Frank and I had merely been caretakers preparing the house for its rightful owners. I went home that day with my eyes finally open. The situation was clear. My son had taken advantage of my grief and generosity. He had no intention of moving out. In his mind, the house was already his. The 3rd year of our arrangement arrived with mounting tensions. After our lunch conversation, Jack became more defensive about the house situation. Whenever I brought up their moving plans, he had a new excuse ready. The market was too expensive. Interest rates were too high. They wanted to save more for a bigger down payment. His commute from our neighborhood was perfect. What he never said, but what became increasingly obvious, was the simple truth: they had no intention of leaving. Amanda grew bolder in her territorial behavior. She began hosting dinner parties and book clubs in my home without inviting me or even informing me they would be happening. I would return from grocery shopping to find cars lining the driveway and strangers in my kitchen using my dishes sitting in my living room. On these occasions, Amanda would introduce me awkwardly as Jack's mom who lives in the guest house, as if I were some distant relative they had charitably taken in. The condescension in Jack's tone when discussing anything property-related became more pronounced. When the water heater needed replacing, I suggested we split the cost, since it served both houses. "Mom," Jack said with a patronizing smile, "we are the ones using it most of the time. Besides, think of all the money you are saving by not having a mortgage or rent." I reminded him that I had paid off the mortgage years ago through decades of hard work. His dismissive shrug sent a spike of anger through me that I struggled to contain. One Saturday morning, I walked into the main house to borrow some sugar and found Amanda supervising two workers who were removing the built-in bookshelves Frank had installed in the den. The beautiful oak shelves that had held our books, our memories, our life, were being dismantled. "What are you doing?" I asked, unable to hide my distress. Amanda barely glanced at me. "We are converting this room to a home gym," she explained. "These old shelves take up too much space." Old shelves. As if they were worthless. As if the weekends Frank had spent carefully measuring, cutting, and staining each piece meant nothing. "Did you think to ask me first?" I said, my voice shaking. Amanda looked genuinely confused. "Why would we need to ask? We live here." "We live here. Not you let us live here. Not this is your house we are borrowing. We live here." As if their residency granted them ownership. I retreated to the guest house and cried for hours. That evening, I noticed the workers carrying the disassembled shelves toward the trash pile by the curb. I waited until dark, then salvaged what pieces I could, storing them behind the guest house. I could not save them all, but I needed to preserve something Frank had created with his hands. A week later, I discovered a box of my personal mementos in the garage items that had been stored in my bedroom dresser in the main house. Inside were cards Frank had given me over the years, the dried bouquet from our anniversary photographs of us young and in love. I took the box back to the guest house without comment, but the message was clear. My presence in the main house was being systematically erased. Their children, my grandchildren, came along during this third year. First Emma, then 14 months later, little Thomas. I loved those babies fiercely, and they brought me genuine joy amid the growing tensions. But even this happiness was tainted when I overheard Jack and Amanda discussing nursery plans. "We will convert the master bedroom," Jack said. "Mom's old room is too small for a proper nursery." Mom's old room, my bedroom, the one I had shared with Frank for 15 years, now reduced to Mom's old room as if I were a ghost, a previous occupant with no current claim. When their friends came over, they referred to the property as Jack and Amanda's house. The first time I heard this, I waited for Jack to correct them. He never did. Instead, he gave tours proudly pointing out the improvements they had made to our outdated property. Our outdated property. The home Frank and I had poured our hearts and savings into. The home we had loved and maintained. Now, apparently embarrassingly outdated, until Jack and Amanda rescued it with their modern sensibilities. My friends began to express concern. Judith urged me repeatedly to assert my legal rights. My nursing colleagues from the hospital noticed my increasing withdrawal and sadness when we met for monthly lunches. Martha, my oldest friend, finally confronted me after watching me tear up when someone asked about my living situation. "Dolores," she said firmly, "this is elder abuse. They are taking advantage of you." I bristled at the term elder. I was only 67, hardly elderly, and abuse seemed too harsh a word for what was happening. But the seed was planted. Was I allowing myself to be taken advantage of because of maternal guilt, because of grief over Frank, because of fear of confrontation? I began to observe Jack more critically, comparing the man he had become with the boy I had raised. Frank and I had taught him about hard work, sacrifice, respect for others. Somewhere along the way, those values had been replaced by entitlement. When had that happened? Had we spoiled him? Had we failed as parents? Or was this simply who Jack had always been, and my maternal love had blinded me to it? During a family dinner to celebrate Thomas's first birthday, Jack mentioned casually that they were considering finishing the attic as a playroom for the kids. "That would be quite expensive," I commented. "Well," Jack replied, with a dismissive wave, "it is an investment in our property." Our property. The phrase hung in the air between us. I saw Judith, who had been invited, raise her eyebrows at me from across the table. "Actually," I said carefully, "it is my property." The table fell silent. Amanda's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Jack stared at me, then laughed uncomfortably. "You know what I mean, Mom?" he said. "Our home." But I had finally reached my limit. I did not laugh. I did not smile. I simply looked at my son, really looked at him, and wondered how we had come to this point. After the guests left, Jack confronted me in the kitchen. "What was that about?" he demanded. "Why would you say something like that in front of everyone?" "Because it is the truth," I replied. "This house is in my name. Frank and I paid for it. We own it." Jack's expression darkened. "We have an arrangement," he said stiffly. "We have invested thousands in improvements. You agreed to this." "I agreed to a temporary arrangement." I corrected him. "It has been over 3 years, Jack." He shook his head, looking at me with something like pity. "Mom," he said, in that condescending tone that had become so familiar, "where would you even go? The guest house is perfect for you at your age. You should be grateful you have it." And there it was, the truth laid bare. I should be grateful. Grateful to be allowed to live in the guest house of the property I owned. Grateful that my son had taken over the home I had sacrificed decades to obtain. Grateful to be relegated to a small space while they sprawled throughout the house Frank and I had loved. I said nothing more that night. But as I walked back to the guest house, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of accommodating others, of putting my son's needs before my own, of avoiding conflict, hardened into resolve. That night, I pulled out the property deed from my files and studied it by lamplight. The house was indeed solely in my name. Frank and I had never gotten around to updating our will after his death, something I had felt guilty about. Now it seemed like fate. The next morning I called Judith. "I need a good real estate attorney," I told her, "and a real estate agent. It is time to take back what is mine." The incident that finally pushed me over the edge happened 4 years into our arrangement. Jack and Amanda decided to host a 4th of July barbecue for their friends, colleagues, and neighbors. I was not consulted about the party, merely informed it would be happening. Still trying to keep the peace, I offered to help with preparations. I spent the morning making my famous potato salad and baking cookies, things I had done for Jack's gatherings since he was a child. When I brought them over to the main house, Amanda looked at my offerings with barely concealed disdain. "Oh, we already ordered gourmet sides from that new deli," she said. "But I suppose we can put these out too." I swallowed my hurt and asked how else I could help. "Actually," Amanda said, looking uncomfortable, "we were hoping you could watch the kids during the party. They get fussy with too many people around." I was being uninvited from the party at my own home, relegated to babysitting duty in the guest house. Before I could respond, Jack walked in. "Great idea," he said cheerfully. "Mom can have a quiet afternoon with the grandkids while we entertain." I looked at my son, this stranger wearing Jack's face, and wondered where I had gone wrong. But I agreed, telling myself that at least I would enjoy time with Emma and Thomas. The party was in full swing by mid-afternoon. Music, laughter, and the smell of grilling meat drifted across the yard to the guest house. After putting the children down for naps, I decided to walk over and at least say hello to some of the guests. As I approached the patio, I overheard a conversation that stopped me in my tracks. "This place is amazing," a woman was saying to Jack. "You guys lucked out finding a house with a guest house for your mom." Jack laughed, beer in hand. "Yeah, we got a sweet deal. Mom lived here before us, but the place was stuck in the 80s. We have put a ton of money into bringing it into this century." The woman nodded sympathetically. "It must be nice for her to have you take over the maintenance and decisions. At her age, that must be a relief." Jack took a swig of his beer. "Sometimes she forgets. It is our house now," he said with a chuckle. "She still thinks she has a say in the renovations. I have to remind her that she should just be grateful to have the guest house. Lots of people her age end up in retirement homes. Our house now. She should just be grateful." The words echoed in my head as I stood frozen behind a large potted plant. Amanda joined the conversation, adding that they were planning to redo the kitchen next, something I was hearing about for the first time. I must have made a noise because suddenly they noticed me standing there. Jack's face registered shock, then quickly rearranged itself into a welcoming smile. "Mom," he called out too loudly. "Come join us." But it was too late. I had heard the truth directly from his lips. In front of witnesses, he had claimed my house as his own and suggested I should be grateful for his generosity in allowing me the guest house. I turned without a word and walked back to the guest house, my legs somehow carrying me, despite the numbness spreading through my body. Behind me, I heard Amanda say something about medication and confusion. Another humiliation. I sat in my small living room, surrounded by the few possessions I had kept when I moved out of my home. Decades of memories reduced to this handful of items. Frank's voice seemed to fill the room suddenly, a memory from long ago. "No one will ever value what you have unless you value it first, Dolores." Frank had said those words when I was considering quitting nursing school because it was too hard. He had believed in me then. He would be ashamed of how I had allowed our son to treat me now. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I pulled out all my financial documents, the property deed, our old will's insurance papers. Everything confirmed what I already knew. The house was legally mine. Jack had no claim to it beyond what I had generously offered, a temporary arrangement he had exploited and extended. The next morning, I called my bank and confirmed I had access to enough funds to live comfortably while I sorted out this situation. Then I called Judith and asked for the name of the best real estate attorney in the area. Finally, I called Marcus and told him everything. "You know what you need to do," he said simply. And I did. For the first time in years, I saw with perfect clarity what needed to happen. I made an appointment with the attorney Judith recommended, a sharp woman named Gloria who specialized in property disputes. After reviewing my documents, she confirmed what I already knew. "Mrs. Baker," she said, "using my married name, this is very straightforward legally. The house is yours. You can sell it, stay in it, or evict your son with proper notice. The choice is entirely yours." I thanked her and asked her to prepare the necessary paperwork for a potential sale. I was not sure yet what I would do, but I wanted to be ready. That weekend, Jack and Amanda took the children to visit her parents. It was the opportunity I needed. I contacted 3 real estate agents and arranged for them to evaluate the property while the house was empty. All 3 were impressed with the location and the recent renovations. All 3 suggested listing prices well above what I had expected. The third agent, a straightforward woman named Diane, asked me bluntly about my situation after noticing I came from the guest house rather than the main house. I found myself telling her the whole story. She nodded with understanding rather than pity. "I see this more often than you would think," she said. "Family situations can get complicated when property is involved." She suggested a plan that would work with my timeline and goals. She also recommended discretion until I was ready to move forward. I hired her on the spot, impressed with her professionalism and lack of judgment. Over the next few weeks, I went through the motions of normal life while secretly preparing for what would come next. I used my nursing skills to maintain a calm exterior while my inner resolve strengthened. Jack and Amanda continued their entitled behavior unaware of what was brewing. I began quietly sorting through my remaining possessions in the main house, retrieving family heirlooms and personal items when no one was home. I opened a new bank account at a different bank and transferred funds for my next phase of life. When Diane called to tell me she had a potential buyer who wanted to see the property, I arranged for it to happen during Jack and Amanda's workday. The couple who walked through were wealthy professionals looking for exactly this kind of property. They barely glanced at the guest house, focusing instead on the main house that Jack and Amanda had so beautifully modernized. 2 days later, Diane called with an offer. It was substantially above asking price, with a request for a quick closing. The buyers had seen multiple properties, but felt this one was perfect for them. I sat in the guest house with the offer in hand, turning over my options. I could keep the house and assert my ownership, forcing Jack and Amanda to adjust to the reality of being guests rather than owners. I could sell it and use the proceeds to help Jack and Amanda buy their own place, rewarding their entitlement with more generosity. Or I could sell it, take care of myself for once, and let Jack and Amanda face the consequences of their assumptions and behavior. I thought about Frank, about the years we spent sacrificing for this house. I thought about Jack as a little boy, the child we had loved and raised to be respectful and hardworking. I thought about the grandchildren who brought me such joy despite the difficult circumstances. Then I remembered Jack's words at the barbecue. She should just be grateful to have the guest house. I signed the acceptance of the offer that evening. Diane submitted it immediately, and by the next day we were officially in escrow. The buyers requested a 45-day close, with 15 additional days for the current occupants to vacate the property. It was done. I had sold my house. Now I just had to break the news to Jack and Amanda. With the house sale in process, I entered a strange period of calm deception. On the surface, nothing had changed. I continued my routines, had occasional meals with Jack and Amanda, and doted on my grandchildren. Meanwhile, I was methodically preparing for the dramatic change that would soon upend all our lives. My nursing career had taught me to remain composed in crisis situations. Those skills served me well now, as I maintained a pleasant facade while executing my plan. Jack and Amanda noticed nothing amiss, so convinced were they of their position and my compliance. I began searching for a new place to live. After decades in a house, the idea of a fresh start both terrified and exhilarated me. I looked at condominiums in a nearby city drawn to their manageable size and built-in social opportunities. No more rattling around in a guest house while watching others enjoy my home. To my surprise, I found a lovely two-bedroom unit in a building with a garden courtyard and community room. The moment I walked in, I felt a sense of possibility I had not experienced since Frank died. I could envision myself here making new friends, building a new chapter of life. Using some of my savings, I made an offer which was quickly accepted. I would own my new home free and clear, with plenty left from the house sale, to live comfortably, and perhaps travel, something Frank and I had always planned to do in retirement. While the real estate transactions progressed, I began quietly preparing for my move. I sorted through my belongings in the guest house, donating things I no longer needed, and packing precious items when Jack and Amanda were out. I had my mail forwarded to a post office box, so Jack would not notice any paperwork related to the sales. I visited my new condominium several times, measuring spaces and planning furniture placement. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of joy, thinking about decorating a space exactly as I wanted it. No one would question my choices or remind me to be grateful. The escrow period passed quickly. Documents were signed, inspections completed, contingencies removed. 2 days before closing, my real estate attorney called to confirm everything was proceeding smoothly. The new owners would take possession in exactly 17 days. Now, I needed to inform Jack and Amanda. I considered various approaches. I could tell them immediately, giving them the full 17 days to process the news and make arrangements. I could wait until closing was complete to avoid any interference. I could tell them privately or in a public setting to minimize potential drama. In the end, I decided on Sunday dinner 2 days after closing. This had become a weekly tradition, with Amanda cooking and me bringing dessert. The grandchildren would be present, which would hopefully keep reactions somewhat contained. The days leading up to closing passed with excruciating slowness. I signed the final papers for both transactions, the sale of the house and the purchase of my condominium. Both would record on the same day, and then the countdown to vacancy would begin. I felt strangely detached as I signed away the house that had meant so much to Frank and me. This was no longer the home we had created together. It had been transformed, our touches erased, our memories packed away. What I was selling was just a structure now, one that had become a symbol of my son's disrespect rather than the haven Frank and I had worked so hard to create. The sale closed on Friday. I was now officially no longer the owner of the property. The new owners, the Petersons, seemed like lovely people. They had plans for the guest house to become a home office and guest quarters for their aging parents when they visited. At least someone's parents would be treated with respect in that space. That Sunday, I arrived for dinner with a homemade apple pie, Frank's favorite. Jack was watching football in the living room while Amanda finished preparing the meal. The children played on the floor with building blocks. It looked like a normal family scene, though I now saw clearly the power dynamics I had been blind to for so long. We sat down to dinner, and conversation flowed as usual. Jack talked about work challenges. Amanda discussed her plans for redecorating the dining room. I commented on how quickly the grandchildren were growing. Ordinary family talk. As Amanda served coffee with my apple pie, I took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. "I have some news to share," I said calmly. 3 sets of eyes turned to me. Only the children continued playing, oblivious to the tension suddenly filling the room. I have sold the house, I stated simply. Closing was completed Friday. The new owners will take possession in 2 weeks. The silence that followed was absolute. Jack's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. Amanda's fork clattered onto her plate. "What do you mean you sold the house?" Jack finally asked, his voice strained with disbelief. "I mean exactly that," I replied, keeping my tone even. "I put the property on the market, accepted an offer, and the sale closed 2 days ago." Amanda found her voice next. "But you cannot do that. We live here." "Actually, I can." And did I explained. The house was solely in my name. As the legal owner, I had every right to sell it. Jack's face had turned an alarming shade of red. His eyes bulged as he struggled to process what I was saying. "This is our home," he exploded, slamming his hand on the table and making the children look up in alarm. "We have put thousands into renovations. We have built a life here." I remained calm, even as my heart raced. "This was my home," I corrected gently. "The home Frank and I sacrificed for decades to buy. The home I generously allowed you to stay in temporarily, an arrangement that somehow became permanent without my consent." Amanda began to cry loud, dramatic sobs that seemed more angry than sad. "This cannot be legal," she insisted between gasps. "We have rights as residents." "You do," I acknowledged. "Which is why the new owners have given you 15 days from tomorrow to vacate the property. That is more than the legally required time." Jack stood so abruptly. His chair toppled backward, startling little Thomas into tears. "How could you do this to your own family?" he demanded, his voice shaking with rage. "Where are we supposed to go?" "The same place you were supposed to go 2 years ago," I replied. "Your own home, which you were supposedly saving for, while staying here temporarily." Amanda gathered the crying children and hustled them from the room, shooting me a venomous glare as she left. Jack paced the kitchen, running his hands through his hair. "This is insane, Mom. Completely insane. You cannot expect us to find a place and move in 2 weeks." I reminded him that it had been 4 years since our temporary arrangement began. 4 years during which they had made no effort to find their own place. 4 years of taking advantage of my generosity. "You told your friends that I should be grateful to have the guest house," I said quietly. "Those were your exact words, Jack. Grateful to live in the guest house of my own property." He had the grace to look briefly ashamed before anger reasserted itself. "So this is revenge," he spat. "Throwing your own son and grandchildren out on the street because of one comment." I shook my head, sadness replacing the nervous tension I had felt. "This is not revenge, Jack. This is me finally standing up for myself. This is me refusing to be taken advantage of any longer." He switched tactics, then his voice becoming wheedling. "Mom, be reasonable. We can work this out. Maybe we could buy the house from you. We could get a mortgage, make payments to you." "The house is sold," I said firmly. "The transaction is complete." "Then unsell it," he demanded. "Call them and tell them you made a mistake." I almost laughed at the childish suggestion. "It does not work that way, as you know. The house has new owners now. I have purchased a condominium where I will be living." His expression changed as this new information registered. "You bought a place without telling us, without considering us." The irony of his outrage was not lost on me. "Yes, Jack, I made a major life decision without consulting you, just as you have been making decisions about my house for years without consulting me." He collapsed into a chair, the fight draining from him as reality set in. "What are we going to do?" he asked, sounding for a moment like the little boy who would come to me with skinned knees and broken toys. "You will do what adults do," I said, not unkindly. You will find a place to live, sign a lease, or get a mortgage and move forward. I stood to leave, sensing the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. I have seen some nice rental properties in the area that might work while you look for something permanent, I offered. I can send you the listings. Jack looked up at me, his expression a mixture of anger, betrayal, and dawning respect. You really did it, he said. You really sold the house right out from under us. I nodded. I really did. And now I am going back to the guest house to continue packing. I suggest you and Amanda start doing the same. I left him sitting at the table staring into his cold coffee. As I walked across the yard to the guest house, I felt lighter than I had in years. The confrontation I had dreaded was over. The truth was out. Now we all had to live with the consequences of our choices. The days following my announcement were tense and chaotic. Jack and Amanda cycled through various emotional states: denial, anger, bargaining, and finally reluctant acceptance. The morning after our Sunday dinner revelation, Jack came to the guest house before work. His eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but his tone was conciliatory. I talked to a lawyer last night, he admitted. He confirmed what you said. The house was yours to sell. I nodded, continuing to pack books into a small box. Is there any way we could work something out with the new owners? He asked, desperation, edging his voice. Maybe they would sell it back to us. The Petersons paid cash well above market value, I explained. They are excited to move in. This is not a negotiable situation, Jack. He slumped against the doorframe, looking deflated. I cannot believe this is happening, he murmured. 4 years we have lived here, made this place our home, and now we have 2 weeks to leave. I paused my packing and looked directly at him. 3 years and 10 months longer than our agreed-upon temporary arrangement. I reminded him gently. This should not come as such a shock. His expression hardened momentarily before crumpling into something like shame. I know we overstayed, he admitted quietly. It was just so easy to stay. The house is perfect, the schools are great for the kids, and you seemed okay in the guest house. I seemed okay because I was trying to keep the peace, I explained, because I valued our relationship more than asserting my rights. But that changed when I heard you tell your friends that I should be grateful for the guest house. He winced visibly. That was a terrible thing to say. I was showing off for friends, trying to look like the generous son taking care of his mother. It was stupid and disrespectful. It was, I agreed. But it was also honest. It revealed how you truly saw our arrangement. Jack looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. We really do only have 2 weeks. 15 days from yesterday, I confirmed. The Petersons are being quite reasonable. Legally, they could give you just 7 days. He nodded slowly, then straightened up. I better start looking for a place then. That would be wise, I agreed, returning to my packing. Amanda was less accepting. She came by that afternoon while Jack was at work, children in tow. This is cruel, Dolores, she said without preamble. You are punishing the children for adult issues. I put down the photo I was wrapping in tissue paper and regarded my daughter-in-law steadily. The children will be fine, Amanda. Children are resilient. They will adapt to a new home just as they would adapt to a new school or new friends. She shifted Thomas to her other hip, her expression bitter. Easy for you to say. You have already found a place. We have to scramble to find somewhere in 2 weeks. I reminded her that they had had 4 years to prepare for this eventuality. 4 years during which they had made no effort to save for their own place or even look at potential properties. Besides, I added, you both have good jobs and substantial savings since you have been living rent-free in my house for years. You will land on your feet. Her face flushed with anger. "I thought you loved your grandchildren," she said accusingly. "How can you do this to them?" It was a low blow attempting to use the children as emotional leverage. I kept my composure. "I love Emma and Thomas very much," I said calmly. "I will continue to be a part of their lives. But my love for them does not obligate me to let their parents take advantage of me indefinitely." Amanda left in a huff, but her parting words revealed the beginning of acceptance. "Jack is looking at apartments today after work," she said stiffly. "Not that you care." "I do care," I called after her. "I hope you find something wonderful." The next few days brought a flurry of activity at the main house. Jack and Amanda began packing, though I noticed they were being selective, focusing on clothing and personal items rather than furniture. I suspected they assumed they would take all the furnishings with them. When Jack mentioned casually that they would need a moving truck for the furniture, I had to clarify another misunderstanding. "Most of the furniture stays with the house," I explained. "It was listed in the sale as included." Jack looked stunned. "But we have been using it for years." "Using it, yes," I agreed, "but not owning it. The living room set dining table, master bedroom suite, guest room furniture, all of that belongs to the house. Your bedroom furniture from Chicago, the items you have purchased since moving in, those are yours to take." Another argument ensued, but there was less heat in it. Jack and Amanda were beginning to recognize the limits of their position. By day 5, they had found a 3-bedroom apartment in a nice complex about 20 minutes away. It was smaller than the house, but the rent was reasonable and they could move in immediately. Jack signed a 6-month lease, giving them time to look for a more permanent solution. As they began moving their belongings to the apartment, the reality of the situation fully set in. I overheard Amanda on the phone with her mother, finally acknowledging their role in what had happened. "We got too comfortable," she admitted. "We started treating it like our house, and Dolores finally had enough. I cannot really blame her, though I wish she had given us more notice." It was progress, this small acknowledgement of responsibility. Jack, too, seemed to be coming to terms with the consequences of his actions. He worked tirelessly to pack and move their belongings, occasionally asking my advice about the apartment setup or neighborhood amenities. A week into the 15-day period, I invited them to see my new condominium. It was a peace offering of sorts, a way to show them I was not disappearing from their lives. Jack and Amanda came alone, having left the children with a sitter. They were polite but reserved as I showed them around the modern open-concept space. "It is really nice," Mom Jack said, seeming genuinely impressed. "I like the community areas." Amanda admired the kitchen and spacious balcony. "It suits you," she commented, the first kind words she had spoken to me in days. "I will be comfortable here," I agreed, "and there is a park nearby where I can take the grandchildren." At the mention of the children, Amanda's expression softened slightly. "They miss you," she admitted. "Emma keeps asking when she can visit Grandma." I felt a pang of sadness. The children were innocent in all this, and I had been so focused on the conflict with their parents that I had seen less of them lately. "I would love to have them visit once I am settled," I offered. "Perhaps next weekend." Jack nodded, a tentative smile forming. "That would be good. Maybe we could all have dinner here, start fresh." It was an olive branch, small but significant. I accepted it gratefully. As we parted that day, the tension between us had eased somewhat. We were not back to normal, whatever normal had been, but we were finding a way forward. The remaining days passed quickly. Jack and Amanda completed their move to the apartment, gradually accepting their new reality. There were still moments of resentment and bitter comments, particularly from Amanda, but the open hostility had faded. 2 days before the Petersons were scheduled to take possession, Jack came to help me move the last of my belongings from the guest house to my new condominium. As we carried boxes to my car, he paused to look at the main house, his expression wistful. "I really thought it would be ours someday," he admitted. "I guess I started believing that before it was appropriate." I followed his gaze to the beautiful colonial that Frank and I had worked so hard to buy. It did look different now, modernized and updated by Jack and Amanda's renovations. In some ways, it reflected my son more than it reflected me and Frank anymore. It was never about the house itself, I told him softly. It was about respect, about acknowledging that it was my house to give or keep. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I treated you like an obligation instead of my mother," he acknowledged, "like someone I had to accommodate rather than the person who sacrificed everything to give me a good life." His words touched me deeply. It was the first time he had truly acknowledged the root of the problem. I put down my box and embraced my son, feeling the tension of the past weeks, months, years begin to dissolve. "I love you, Jack," I said firmly. "That has never changed and never will. But I needed to stand up for myself." He hugged me back tightly. "I know, Mom, and honestly, I respect you for it, even though it has been a hard lesson." As we finished loading my car, I felt a chapter closing. Tomorrow I would hand the keys to the Petersons, officially ending my connection to the property that had been such an important part of my life with Frank. Yet rather than sadness, I felt a sense of rightness, of things finally being as they should be. That evening, as I sat alone in the guest house for the last time, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The years of hard work with Frank, the joy of finally buying our dream home, the grief of losing him, the slow erosion of my place in the home we had created, and finally, the reclaiming of my power and self-respect. Frank would have been proud, I thought. Not of selling the house necessarily, but of finally valuing myself enough to stand up for what was right. No one will ever value what you have unless you value it first, Dolores. His words had guided me to this moment of quiet triumph. Tomorrow would bring a new beginning, a new home, a reset relationship with my son and his family, and most importantly, a renewed sense of my own worth and strength. At 68 years old, I was starting fresh, and the future looked bright. The day I handed the keys to the Petersons was bittersweet. Mrs. Peterson, a warm woman, about 15 years, my junior seemed to sense the emotional significance of the moment. "We will take good care of your beautiful home," she assured me, "and you are welcome to visit any time you want to see the gardens you created." I thanked her for the kindness, but knew I probably would not take her up on the offer. That chapter of my life was closing. It was time to look forward, not backward. My new condominium quickly became a haven. I decorated it exactly as I pleased, a blend of treasured items from my life with Frank and new pieces that reflected my current tastes. The community welcomed me warmly. I joined the book club, took water aerobics classes in the complex pool, and made new friends who knew nothing of my past conflicts. Meanwhile, Jack and Amanda were adjusting to apartment living. It was not easy for them after years in a spacious house, but they managed. Jack called me regularly with updates, his tone, gradually losing the resentment that had colored our early conversations after the move. 3 weeks after the move, I invited them for Sunday dinner at my condominium. I spent the day cooking Frank's famous pot roast recipe and preparing the guest room for the grandchildren to nap if needed. I wanted this new beginning to be perfect. They arrived with flowers and wine, a peace offering that touched me deeply. The children rushed to hug me, their excitement at seeing Grandma again bringing tears to my eyes. We had lost precious weeks during the conflict time I would never get back with them. The dinner went surprisingly well. Jack and Amanda shared stories about the apartment complex and their new neighbors. I told them about my water aerobics class and the friends I was making. We carefully avoided mentions of the house or the circumstances that had brought us here. After dinner, with the children playing quietly in the living room, Jack broached the subject we had been dancing around. "I want to apologize again, Mom," he said seriously. "What we did was wrong. We took advantage of your generosity and then acted entitled to something that was never ours." Amanda nodded, her expression contrite. "I was horrible to you, Dolores. The things I said, the way I treated your belongings, it was inexcusable." Their apologies were sincere, if somewhat late. I accepted them graciously, eager to move our relationship to healthier ground. We all made mistakes, I acknowledged. I should have spoken up sooner instead of letting resentment build. We need to communicate better going forward. Jack raised his glass in a toast to new beginnings and painful lessons learned. We clinked glasses, and I felt a weight lifting. We would be okay. Different than before, but okay. Over the following months, Jack and Amanda began house hunting in earnest. With the reality check of losing their housing so abruptly, they approached the process with new maturity and realistic expectations. Jack called me one evening, excitement in his voice. "We found a place, Mom," he said. "It is smaller than your house, older too, but it has good bones and is in our price range." I was genuinely happy for them. This was what should have happened years ago. They were establishing themselves independently, creating their own home rather than taking over mine. When they closed on the modest 3-bedroom ranch, I gave them a housewarming gift. Not money or furnishings, but something more meaningful. I had carefully preserved scraps of wallpaper from every room of the house. Frank and I had shared our dream home. I had them framed with small labels, noting what each pattern was and where it had hung. "This is your history," I told Jack as he unwrapped the gift. "The home your father and I created for our family. Now you are creating your own family home, but you can keep a piece of your past with you." Jack teared up as he examined the framed collection. It was perhaps the first time he truly understood what the house had meant to me and Frank, beyond its monetary value or physical comfort. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mom," he said quietly. "I would have understood if you had." "You are my son," I replied simply. "That will never change. But our relationship needed to change to become more balanced and respectful." The most surprising outcome of the whole ordeal was how it affected my grandchildren. Emma, at 6, was old enough to understand some of what had happened. One day, while visiting my condominium, she asked me a question that took me aback. "Grandma," she said seriously, "did Daddy try to take your house?" I considered how to answer truthfully, but kindly. I settled for a simplified version of events. "Your daddy and I had a misunderstanding about the house," I explained. "I let them live there to be helpful, but then there was confusion about whose house it really was. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too." Emma nodded wisely. "Daddy told me he was wrong, and that he was sorry he made you sad. He said we should always respect other people's, things, even families." Out of the mouths of babes, Jack was teaching his children the lesson he had learned so painfully. It was perhaps the most positive outcome I could have hoped for. As my new life settled into comfortable routines, I found myself reflecting often on the journey that had brought me here, the pain of Frank's loss, the misguided attempt to fill the void by having Jack and his family close, the slow erosion of my standing in my own home, the difficult but necessary decision to reclaim my power. Looking back, I recognized that grief had made me vulnerable. In trying to ease my loneliness, I had allowed boundaries to blur and expectations to remain unspoken. Jack and Amanda had taken advantage, certainly, but I had enabled their behavior through my silence and compliance. The experience taught me that love does not require self-sacrifice to the point of erasure, that setting boundaries is not selfish but necessary for healthy relationships, that standing up for yourself does not mean you love others less. Frank would have understood this immediately. He had always been my strength, my advocate. In his absence, I had to learn to be those things for myself. Now, as I enter my 70s, surrounded by new friends with a renewed relationship with my son and his family, I know that the hardest decision I ever made was also the most necessary. By selling my house, I not only reclaimed my material property, but my sense of self-worth and dignity. If my story teaches anything, let it be this: it is never too late to stand up for yourself. The people who truly love you will adjust and ultimately respect you more for it. Those who cannot accept your boundaries were not honoring your love in the first place. And what about Jack and Amanda? They have grown in ways I never expected. The entitled attitude that had characterized their behavior in my house has been replaced by a newfound appreciation for what they earn themselves. Their modest home is truly theirs, paid for with their own money, decorated with their own taste. The pride they take in it is genuine and earned. Our Sunday dinners continue alternating between my condominium and their home. The grandchildren spend weekends with me regularly. Jack calls just to check in, something he rarely did during the years they lived in my house. In losing the house, I gained something far more valuable: a healthy, respectful relationship with my son and his family, and the knowledge that at 68 years old, I still had the courage to start over. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have had the strength to sell your home, to teach your children about respect and boundaries? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about standing up for yourself, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening, and remember, it is never too late to reclaim your power and your peace.